Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Yeah, waking up after a late night Sunday football game, we got robbed. You feel like you didn't get enough. I know I didn't get enough sleep. You feel like the weekend didn't happen. It was in such a blur, right? And that is somewhat the case. Again, just lack of sleep for the most part. And I blame football. But here we are anyway. We're going to start the week where we ended last week. This from CBS News on Friday night.
There are new concerns about election night chaos in the battleground state of Georgia. That's because today the state's Republican-led election board passed a controversial measure requiring every single ballot to be counted by hand. CBS's Scott McFarland is in Atlanta looking into how that could all play out.
Just as Vice President Kamala Harris arrived seeking new altitude in this battleground state, a Georgia state election board controlled by former President Donald Trump's supporters is causing turbulence. With just more than 6 weeks until Election Day, 3 Republicans who hold a majority on the board voted to change the rules for handling ballots, requiring poll workers at each precinct in Georgia's 159 counties to conduct a hand count of all the ballots on election night, in addition to the traditional machine count. Trump ally Janelle King.
What I don't want to do is set a precedent that we are okay with speed over accuracy.
I don't see any danger in hand counting. If the complaint is that, I just don't want to stay there an extra hour, that's just not a good enough complaint for me.
An idea opponents blistered as an attempt to slow the vote count.
We are talking about all these last-minute changes, and it makes me question whether members of this board are operating in good faith.
That is Representative Syra Draper from the Georgia House of Representatives.
Others said it will cost millions of dollars to hire and train additional workers and sow distrust in the results and delay tabulation of final results by days or weeks.
I brought with me 1,872 pages of paper representing what a stack of ballots could look like on a busy counting day.
That the voice of Kristen Neighbors of the organization that is called All Voting Matters. She is the Georgia State Director of that organization.
All the top Republicans in the state, including the governor, have criticized the board's actions, accusing them of exceeding their authority and making 11th-hour changes.
That's right. The governor, the attorney general, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who in August said activists seeking to impose last-minute changes in election procedures outside of the legislative process undermine voter confidence and burden election workers. And comically, the least subtle part about this,
Trump, meanwhile, has lauded and thanked the board members for considering new rules.
Right?
They're on fire. They're doing a great job. 3 members.
The vice president didn't address the election board controversy in an event in the Atlanta suburbs of Cobb County. Instead, slamming Republicans for limiting abortion services, citing the story of Amber Nicole Thurman, a Georgia woman who died because she didn't receive the appropriate abortion care in time.
We will make sure Amber is not just remembered as a statistic and that she should be alive today.
This dispute over the hand counting of ballots rule seems destined for court. A legal challenge to stop the rule from taking effect by November 5th could be filed by Monday.
And I want to thank Scott McFarland on behalf of the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau for recording that stand-up right there at that key point in time when there was like calamity of fire trucks and squad cars just going absolutely bonkers in the background. You couldn't have waited for that to just chill out. Trust me, I do that every morning. I've got Freedom Parkway and Boulevard right behind me. I sometimes have to go, okay, let's just let that subside. The lone Democrat on the state election board is Sarah Tindall Gazal. She went on Rachel Maddow to discuss their antics over the weekend.
I think a lot of people who've been watching what have been happening in Georgia, particularly now that the Secretary of State has weighed in and advised that some of these proposed changes seem to be in contravention of Georgia law, now that the Attorney General's office have weighed in and said this is beyond, some of these changes are beyond the statutory authority of the board. I think a lot of people are looking at that and thinking, well, the board is doing all these things, but none of it'll stand, that this will all get blocked by the courts, that Georgia's elections won't be affected by the chaos that these rules, at least on paper, would seem to be injecting into the process. Do you share that confidence? Do you think the courts will essentially come to the rescue here and keep Georgia's normal election procedures in place?
Well, I certainly have hope that they will do that. Confidence, I'm not nearly as confident as some of the commentary that I've seen and read, because it's a really narrow window, both in terms of time and in terms of the legal theory, because there is it's hard to sue the state. There's sovereign immunity questions that come into play. The fact that my colleagues are willing to completely disregard advice of our counsel, we are represented by the Attorney General's office. We were told flat out that this was not a lawful use of our authority. Right. That I found actually quite shocking.
I wondered when I saw that today, especially when the chairman of the board, who voted the same way that you did on most of these rule changes, when he explicitly noted at today's hearing, we are taking this action. If you vote in favor of this, this is in contravention of the legal advice we have been given about what we are legally allowed to do. I wondered if there might actually be potentially worries among the majority of the board that voted for those changes that they might have been contravening Georgia law simply by taking this vote and trying to take actions that they're not legally allowed to take.
You would think, but I also would suspect that if they were actually concerned about it, they would have voted differently, because this counting the ballots is theater, frankly. It doesn't add actual security. There are so many backups and ways of making sure that we know how many ballots were cast. It's confirmed 3 different ways. So it seems that they have some other motive.
Yeah, well, we know what that motive is. The Georgia law isn't their boss. The governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, who used to be the election board boss, I guess, so to speak, isn't their boss. There's only one person they consider, those 3 Republicans, the MAGA 3 on the board, there's only one person they seem to be answering to.
They're on fire. They're doing a great job. 3 members.
By the way, another formerly elected Georgia Republican, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who didn't lose his seat. He just decided not to run again. He decided not to be a part of the current cesspool that is the GOP representing the voters of Georgia. Jeff Duncan weighed in with Anderson Cooper on CNN as well.
Well, first of all, just your reaction to this hand count rule in your home state, because this is what a lot of election deniers have been pushing for, saying it should all just be paper ballots and hand counted. Obviously, there's often more human error in hand counting ballots than machines.
Yeah, this newly reconfigured state election board, they got their way. They've been carrying Donald Trump's water for months now, ankle biting at solutions in search of a problem. And today they injected the ultimate asterisk mark into our November election. They are able to change laws to follow conspiracy theories instead of reality. And, it's unfortunate. And we're in this juxtaposed because even if these lawsuits come forward, then the MAGA crowd is going to scream and Donald Trump's going to be the chief cheerleader, saying that they didn't get a fair opportunity to run a fair election. So it's really a difficult spot. I once again call on Republican leadership from every corner of this state, county, city, state, legislative, even the governor's office, to call on this as loud as absolute possible, that this is a horrendous idea and it usurps democracy in its ultimate format.
We should also just point out, the election in Georgia was free and fair, and there was no widespread voter fraud. So, all these conspiracy theories are just, they've been looked at, they've been examined, there's nothing there. Fast forward to election night this year, what would this new process mean for Georgia's count in practice?
Well, it would slow it down and it would inject a human element to it, which once again is really the secret sauce to these conspiracy theories, is doubt. They've planted the ultimate seed of doubt, and it would just open up for opportunity and delay the actual count and the verification or certification of the election process, which time is your enemy in elections. You want to get the votes in crisp, clean, counted, and registered as quickly as you can to eliminate any sort of doubts or improprieties. But look, these guys aren't interested in winning this election fair and square, and that's by putting a good candidate forward that can actually win. There's no reason why a Republican candidate for president shouldn't be way out in front in the state of Georgia. 8 statewide constitutional officers are Republicans, strong majorities with Republicans in the legislature. The only time a Republican loses in Georgia is when Donald Trump puts his fingers on him. We have 2 U.S. senators to prove that case.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that according to a recent survey conducted by the paper, sizable majorities, Democratic and independent voters in the state, believe the election will be fair and accurate, but less than half of Georgia Republicans expressed such confidence. Even with this hand count, if the former president loses in the state, do you think Georgia Republicans will accept that decision?
Well, they're going to have to. Once again, he will have led the losing team. And my hope, look, Anderson, this whole thing from day one for me is not about trying to get popularity. It's about trying to fix the Republican Party. And it needs to start here in Georgia. We are broken at our core as Republicans here in Georgia. We have a state party that is dysfunctional and only solely worships one person and one person only, and that's Donald Trump. He could say jump off a bridge and they would do it. He could say rig an election and they would try to do it. That's exactly what's happening with the state election board.
So assuming this is going to be challenged in court, do you think it will be overturned in court?
I'm not an attorney. I don't even get to play one on TVs. My hope is it is. My hope that it quickly is overturned and allows the laws in place, because the realities of this, we're so close to the actual election day.
Right.
And there just makes no sense to do it. I don't want any doubt. And look, if Donald Trump wins this state, so be it. It is what it is. I'll accept the results and move on. If Kamala Harris wins, then the other folks on the other side should accept the vote and move on. We need to move on as a country. We need to move on as a party from this hyper chaotic period of time that we find ourselves in.
And by the way, expert after expert after expert came before that state election board and gave their input from local offices, local elections offices, and from advocacy groups across the ideological spectrum. And the MAGA 3 we're going to do specifically what their boss, and we know who that is, tells them to do. I mean, it's like when you go to the bank and you see that the teller puts that big wad of cash in the machine to count before submitting it, and then does it again, and then maybe does it a third time, and then accepts the result of that count, and then deposits the money that you dropped in. And yeah, if you ever worked in a business and you have to deal with large sums of cash, you know what I'm talking about. You give them that large sum of cash from your register, they count it in the machine, they count it again in the machine, they count it again in the machine, they get the same number all three times, and they put the money in the bank account. You trust that, right? Would you trust a huge wad of cash to be counted once, twice? How long, first of all, how long do you think that would take? And do you think that every count would be accurate? I mean, it's human count. The human angle, the human error part is the part that's most concerning. But the MAGA 3 going to do what the MAGA 3 need to do for their boss. I'm going to give you some of the audio of those experts. Stand by. This is the Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
The hand counting of ballots is to reconcile the number of votes cast in a polling place to the number of ballots taken to the downtown counting facility. It's not hand counting in every race, but that's not always clear. But this state elections board lost all credibility when the 3 MAGA members showed up at a Trump rally and were called out and praised, because elections boards are supposed to have some impartiality and air of presenting a fair election. They are behaving a lot like a group of high school students having an all-nighter to finish a group project on caffeinated beverages. These things should have been taken care of, this rulemaking, this necessary rulemaking. They've known the election date for years, and they've had the laws that needed rules applied to for months and months, and they're waiting until the last minute. I mean, actually, expats who live in foreign countries have already started voting. One of my friends posted last night that he just filled out his ballots. So military and overseas ballots have already gone out. It's a little bit late to be doing these things.
All right. That is a friend of the show, Melita Easters from the Georgia Win List, opining on the episode that aired yesterday of Fox 5 WAGA TV's The Georgia Gang. Also, speaking at that state election board hearing, we evoked her in the first segment there. Kristen Neighbors of All Voting is Local. She gave her expert opinion before that election board, which went in one ear, in 3 years and out 3 others for those 3 election board members.
Thank you, board. My name is Kristen Neighbors. I'm the state director for All Voting is Local Action. We're a nonpartisan organization that advocates for policies and legislative priorities that expand voter access. I'm here today to add my voice to the many election officials who have raised concerns regarding the 2 rules proposed by Charlene Alexander, which would require hand counts on every voting day. I've brought with me 1,872 pages of paper representing what a stack of ballots could look like on a busy counting day. And busier, larger precincts may have even more than this number.
Yep.
If I were to hand this stack of paper to 3 random people in this room, especially at the end of a long voting day, and ask them to arrive at the same total number, do we think that's feasible? Because I personally don't think that's very feasible. Asking our election workers to do this on every voting day is asking for errors. I've personally watched multiple counties conduct full hand counts over the past year. It's normal that many times an hour we can expect small errors to be made, the type of thing where someone's count is off by 1 or 2. This would result in having to count again. We'll also see mistakes where someone says one number when they mean a different one, which can lead to tallies seeming not to match when they actually do. I've also seen more significant errors made, including when one county added up their early vote numbers and the totals were significantly off by about 10%. It took them 3 tries with a weekend of rest in between to tally the numbers correctly, and this was for a race with 2,200 ballots, so not much bigger than the stack here today. I have someone helping me hold the stack because I was too worried it would fall on the floor and make a mess. Like, imagine if those were ballots. None of the errors I've ever witnessed have been due to a machine problem or any type of voter malfeasance. In every single case, it's been a human error. Counting large numbers of anything one by one is an incredibly tedious process and not one humans are well equipped for. People doing a hand count are going to make mistakes, which can then be exploited to spread lies and sow further distrust in our elections and our election officials. It's worth noting that a number of election officials have gone on record recently about the threats they've been facing from activists who don't believe our elections are fair. Passing this rule is just going to add fuel to that fire. I urge you to reject these proposals.
But listen to some of the local election folks.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Joseph Kirk. I'm the election supervisor from Bartow County. I've been in that position since 2007. I'm also the president-elect of Gavrio. White Mother members that are here today, I'm here speaking on behalf of myself, not my organization, but I would like to flag that Gavrio did submit comments about proposed rules. I'm not going to step through each rule today, but I do welcome folks to read those comments. If you do, you will see, for example, we have never stood against reconciliation just in the procedure outlined in rule. There's other ways to do it. What I'm here to do today is to alert y'all that in my professional opinion, these rules go beyond the statutory authority of the board. And from what I've heard this morning, both the Secretary of State and the Attorney General have advised you of pretty much the same thing. The idea of passing rules on the assumption that someone would stop you if you were wrong is no different than an unqualified voter or a person applying for a ballot on the assumption that my office is going to stop them if they can't vote.
Yeah.
And I've had to turn folks into y'all for that before. I ask that rather than pass the rules today, that you slow down and work with us as election professionals to craft rules that work within the law, rather than attempting to fill perceived gaps in the law. Acknowledge the practical realities of modern election administration, achieve the goals as efficiently as possible, and are passed outside of a 90-day quiet period before any regularly scheduled election. As my colleagues mentioned, the election has already begun. We need to focus on a smooth and orderly election that is conducted in accordance with state law and federal law. We need to focus on instructing our employees and citizens what the rules are and what to expect. And unless there is a true emergency, we need time to put any new procedures in place. I'm here to tell you that time has already passed.
And hey, listen, I would love to give one of the MAGA 3 at least some credit for thinking, you know what, maybe we are going a little too fast with this. Maybe we are a little too hasty with this. Janelle King, let's give her some credit. She actually thought about maybe doing some face-saving measure here by insisting that, well, maybe we should vote on this, but it not take, it doesn't go into effect until 2025. Listen to this.
I would like to make the motion that we pass this rule, but that it does not go, so we can be in a line with the law, but that it does not go into effect until 2025.
I don't think we can do that. Once this rule is passed, it will be posted within 48 hours, and then 20 days later it becomes in effect. So
that is State Election Board Chair John Fervier explaining to Janelle King, who's on the board, how the election board functions. And by the way, out of their purview, out of their jurisdiction, here's what else that they don't have within their jurisdiction. Funding, budgeting. Ethan Compton from Irwin County brought this valid point up that the state election board cannot address because they don't handle budgeting.
I'm Ethan Compton. I'm a concerned citizen of Wilcox County and the election supervisor of Irwin County. So far this year, rules passed by this board have cost the voters of Irwin County 5 cents per voter. Okay. If passed, rules under consideration today could cost them up to 65 cents per voter.
Who's paying for that?
That adds up across the millions of voters across Georgia.
Yeah.
Almost over 200 pages of elections code and rules have been implemented since 2020. We have practiced on them. We have trained. We are prepared. We are ready. Do not change this at the last second. To bring back the football reference that Supervisor Adams brought up, it's not 2 minutes before the game. Military ballots have already been issued. We have started.
It's The Ron Show, America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So let me let you behind the curtain a little bit. Normally what I do weekdays is I pre-produce the show so that it airs 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. It'll replay 5 to 6 p.m. and then 7 to 8 p.m. The same show will air at Progressive Voices via TuneIn. I podcast it, et cetera, and so on. So this morning on America One Radio, if you listen, you heard a segment that I'm just going to re-air tomorrow because I have an early real estate thing to do tomorrow, and I needed to get a show done anyway, and it's sort of an evergreen thing. John Oliver last week tonight, skewering Senator J.D. Vance and his involvement, and yes, I think we can call it now, involvement in all the kerfuffle that the folks in Springfield, Ohio have dealt with since the eating the dogs, eating the cats nonsense at the last presidential debate that we all witnessed. Anyway, it was fantastic. I'll give you a lot of that audio tomorrow. In the meanwhile, what happened today, Monday, is that the first two segments, I went over a lot of what went down at Friday's Georgia Election Board meeting, and it got continued to this morning, so there's more. Oh my gosh, there's more. And a lot of grandstanding, and a lot of fact-checking, and not just interpreting the law, but dictating the law to those who seem to want to avoid paying attention to what the law says while pushing, I'll call it an agenda that isn't steeped in law or, of course, fact, because we've been living with the big lie since 2020. So I have more audio from today's Georgia Election Board continuation of Friday's meeting. Are you ready for that? So let me backtrack just a little bit. First of all, I mentioned in the prior segment that one of the state election board members, Sarah Tindall Gazal, was on MSNBC over the weekend, giving her input to Rachel Maddow on the viability, the legality of the state election board and what the MAGA 3 are trying to do. Well, Janice Johnston and Janelle King were not happy with that. Janelle King, by the way, used to be a pundit on Fox 5 WAGA TV's The Georgia Gang. She didn't mind television appearances and offering advice. But she doesn't like it when somebody on the state election board goes on to try and rationalize what the board they're on is trying to do. Anyway, Janice Johnston as well, not happy with the representation being offered of she and the other two of the MAGA 3. Here's Janice's opening statement.
All right, Mr. Chair and board and members that are here, I would like to make a statement. There appears to be an irrational and widespread panic of Democrats and Republicans and all the people of Georgia that have been led to believe that the adopted paper count rule and other adopted rules might be the basis to not certify the election.
Well, when she says Republican, she means the governor, the attorney general, legally speaking, and the Secretary of State that oversees states' elections.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Law's the law.
Please let me reassure every Democrat and member of any other party and the citizens of Georgia
and the governor and the
that
attorney
these
general
rules will help to prevent a last-minute surprise of questioning the results about the count or audit or recount.
Except she's bringing in the human element. Well, I say she. Those who adopted that measure bring in the human element. As I believe we pointed out pretty succinctly last segment, it's the human element of counting thousands of pages of ballots that creates the problem in the first place. It's 2024. There's a reason why we have machines that can do this stuff for us, and they can double check and triple check themselves instead of us stopping by hand to do so.
These rules ensure a chain of custody on election night so that there are no missing ballots. The precinct election night ballot count, the count of the pieces of paper, will be done in public, and there need not be a delay to tabulate because the memory cards, which are used to tabulate, and the scanner tapes that record the number of ballots cast and the votes counted can be immediately delivered to the main election office if the supervisor wants.
Except the human counting of thousands of ballots creates the delay in the first place. And if the first count ain't right and the second count doesn't match the first count but is right, then there's going to be a third. Do you see where this snowballs into being a problem?
These rules are standard operating procedure in all precincts where paper ballots are counted and are followed in many states. The courts reimposed paper ballots on the state of Georgia after many years of using a completely electronic Diebold system. The press wins the prize for misinformation this weekend with false reports that the new rule requires counting the votes rather than counting the paper, to, quote, breaking open the ballot box as if it were never done, to claiming that the SEB certifies the election, to hysterically and wrongfully assuming that it would take months to count the votes. Oddly, the narrative appears coordinated, and depending upon the outfit that is writing, the so-called news is delivered as a scary fairy tale or perhaps an end-of-the-world apocalypse tale.
This is the same board member who, with two others, you know the two others, attempted to have a last-minute meeting without two of the other members of the board. You want to talk about coordination? She doesn't know about coordination because she doesn't even try to coordinate with the entirety of the Georgia State Election Board. This is the same Janice Johnston who, by the way, launched a Georgia Election Board Twitter X handle on her own without even running it past the Georgia Election Board Chairman, John Furvier. That's right. The first tweet was, the State Election Board is committed to the General Assembly's mission of ensuring that elections in Georgia are free and fair, but also legal, uniform, orderly, honest, and trusted. Thanks, Dr. Jan. The author, Janice Johnston, a member of the board who was appointed by the state Republican Party in 2022. I'm reading an article from The Guardian. Sam Levine reporting the next morning. She emailed the next morning after launching the social media page. She emailed her fellow board members and their staff and explained that she had taken it upon herself to create a Twitter handle as well as accounts on Facebook and Instagram. I thought it would be great to have a presence on social media that would facilitate our effort to communicate with the public, she wrote in the email. That had not been previously made public until just recently. As we approach this election cycle, we have the opportunity to provide clear and accurate information to the public and demonstrate transparency. She didn't coordinate this, she just decided to do it on her own. If there is opposition to this, she wrote, please let me know. After she'd already done it. John Furvier, the board's chair, responded shortly after, listing 10 bullet points explaining why he believed her actions were wrong and said that he had never been consulted. He wrote, for a social media site to be set up in the name of the Georgia State Election Board and the chairman of the board and the executive director to not know about it, it is astonishing to me and shows a serious disregard for our positions. He also noted that the account had already spread false information claiming that the election board oversees elections in Georgia. Each of the state's 159 counties runs its elections, which are overseen by the Georgia Secretary of State, a statewide elected official. The board is charged with rulemaking and has the power to investigate elections under state law, but not running them. So either Janice Johnston passed out some information that was incorrect and didn't know it was incorrect, or she did so on purpose. In either event, now that is 2 Georgia State Election Board members we can point to as either having no grasp of what the board is tasked and allowed to do, or passing on misinformation in their capacity on the board. Either is damning. All right, let you get back to her opening statement from earlier today.
Really? Really? Everyone should take a deep breath and calm down. All because of attention to the mundane, unexciting chain of custody processes, reconciling of number processes, review of documents, procedure, posting of information requirements, storage of election materials, and production of data documents. Really? Many articles and reports indicated a limited understanding of the election process.
Including on the board.
We don't have an agenda, but the media does.
Oh boy.
They make money by creating a news story where none exists and promoting division. And opponents use this division for fundraising.
But are they selling embossed Bibles with a politician's name on them or gold-plated tennis shoes? Please, ma'am, have a seat.
Very concerning is the board member in the minority vote that was on national TV claiming it is too close to an election to adopt rules in which the board member did 3 years ago without question or hesitation.
Bless her heart. We only have municipal elections in 2021. She knows that.
Extreme delays, chaos, confusion, blame any election conduct on the rules of the state election board? Really? Let's be clear. No one can blame a hack into AT&T or Jarvis or no-ink poll pads on the state election board rulemaking. No one can blame Dominion scanner malfunction or missing ballots or double scanning of ballots on rulemaking by the state election board. No one can claim that the state election board rules caused ballot images to be incorrectly counted. Remember, the Senate committee chaired by Senator Ligon found that the 2020 election was chaotic and the results could not be trusted. We are trying to avoid chaos.
The reason there was chaos was because of the big lie. And you had a guy from the Oval Office calling the Secretary of State, listen, we just need to find 11,780. There was chaos because the results were a surprise to him and his acolytes. And then you had people breaking into county election board offices and taking data and you're creating the chaos. Your team is creating the chaos, Janice.
But it sells newspapers and it raises money.
Nobody buys newspapers.
Maybe there are sabotage plans to disrupt the election, but let me assure everyone here, everyone listening, everyone watching, it is not the state election board. The counties and the Secretary of State are responsible for the conduct of elections, and I am sure they will do what it takes to conduct a fair, orderly, uniform, and honest election. Thank you.
So, Sarah, a lot of election deniers in the audience, by the way. Sarah Tindall Gazal responded. And by the way, she starts off by pointing out exactly what I did. In odd years, 2021, 3 years ago, as Dr. Janice Johnston pointed out, there were rule changes. There were only municipal elections in that year, so it wouldn't have factored at statewide or federal offices because there were none on any ballots.
Passed in odd years. There are no statewide or federal elections conducted in odd years. The rules that were passed in 2021 did not apply to the elections in 2021 because those were simply municipal elections. So to suggest that that would undermine my suggestion and the statement from the Secretary of State, statement from Republican and Democratic leaders, statements from election supervisors, statements from unanimous resolutions from bipartisan election superintendents that it's too late to pass rules that change the way elections are conducted is extremely disingenuous and frankly suggests a misunderstanding of how election laws apply in Georgia.
Ignorance on the board. And then Janelle King wants to chime in.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something, please?
Sure.
While we're addressing misinformation and misleading statements, you were on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, and you made the assumption that there were members of this board, me included, the majority is what you said, that we have some agenda that we may be working against or working for. Can you please explain to all of us what that agenda is? No, this is a valid question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
I think it's inappropriate for us to put each other on trial.
Mr. Chairman, no one's putting anyone on trial. Your reaction is way more than necessary. It's a very simple question. We can't have this discussion outside of the public, so we're going to do it right here. I want to know, what is the agenda you are alluding to?
I would love to know that myself.
Well, you said it. You said it as if you knew what it was, so I want to know, where did that come from?
Well, when literally the only rules that we are reviewing have been promulgated by people who are on the record denying the results of the 2020 election. We have not been able to work in a deliberative fashion. This board has never seriously considered a petition for rulemaking that has come from outside until 2 months ago.
I'm sorry.
This is not the process that we have used for decades to promulgate rules.
And all of this leads to a conspiracy? You're creating a conspiracy based off an assumption. You just listed assumptions. You said things that you have noticed and observed, and you're taking that and you're placing it on us as fact. You are attacking our integrity, our reputations, and you're alluding to the fact that we are doing something that is somehow dishonest simply because you disagree.
No, sorry. Justin Glau or is it Glao? I don't know how you say his last name. Anyway, Rolling Stone, I'll include this in the show notes at ronchoatl.com. Email show a Georgia State Election Board member, Janice Johnston, worked with Trump supporters to write rules allowing counties to refuse to certify election results. This was just in late August of this year. New emails obtained by Rolling Stone and American Doom reveal how conservative Georgia election officials laid the groundwork for new controversial state election rules designed to give more power to those officials to arbitrarily refuse to certify election results. Months before the Georgia State Election Board passed the rules, emails show a Donald Trump supporter on the board solicited a wish list from conservative county election officials of the materials they would need. Thank you all for agreeing to provide input on the proposed rule for certification documents needed for superintendents prior to certification. Dr. Janice Johnston, the Georgia State Election Board member, wrote on May 12th. Of this year, by the way. What documents and reports do you need to certify the election results, she asks. Justin Glau's reporting goes on to say, the documents obtained through a public records request show specific election materials that Gwinnett County Election Board member David Hancock claimed he needed in order to certify results of the May 2024 primary. The materials he mentioned are reflected in the two controversial rules recently passed by Johnston and two pro-Trump colleagues on the state election board that give broad power to officials like Hancock to refuse to certify election results. I believe that is called coordination, Dr. Johnston. And I'm sorry, Janelle King, you can take umbrage all you want, but hit dogs holler, honey.
I am expressing concern about the fact that this board is acting in a way that the Attorney General has stated is unlawful.
Well, I'm concerned about the fact that you are going on national TV and making an assumption that we are working on some agenda that's been contrived around from the media.
It's not an assumption.
Because I haven't spoken to the Trump campaign. I have nothing to do with the Trump campaign. I've made it very clear where I stand on that issue. You could have asked me directly, but instead, You decide to mischaracterize our integrity and our reputations on national TV, and you think that's somehow beneficial?
All I can do is judge the actions that this board has undertaken.
Right. Actions speak louder than words. Janelle King, my God. We've got the treasure trove of emails. Your friend on the board, the one that you vote with a lot, one of the two that you vote with almost in lockstep, was coordinating with other election deniers on county election boards to try and get all that they needed to do what they needed to do back in May of this year. Oh, by the way, you guys went to a Trump rally and were cited by the man himself seeking applause on your behalf. Friend of the show, opinion columnist from the Georgia Recorder, Jay Bookman, tweeting as he's watching this all breathlessly as well. The state election board meeting is a carnival of kooks, and it is the direct consequence of the Georgia Republican Party's decision to put conspiracy nuts in charge of a sensitive rulemaking agency. It is an embarrassment to the entire state. If you appoint people animated by the delusion that Trump was cheated out of the 2020 election, he tweets, you cannot act surprised when those same people fall prey to a large number of equally crazy delusions. That is what we are witnessing. He's not wrong. And this really isn't all that different than what we're seeing in Springfield, Ohio, as a result of J.D. Vance believing nutty conspiracies from social media in the first place, which, again, we'll dive into tomorrow, thanks to John Oliver and Last Week Tonight. More on show after this. Final few moments of today's Ron Show. Thank you for listening. We gave you a second half that was different this morning on American One Radio than what you'll hear 5 to 6 p.m. today. And if you're listening on Progressive Voices via TuneIn, well, then disregard what I'm saying. This is all fresh to you and via podcast as well. So I gave a deep dive into the Georgia Election Board meeting from Friday and today. And my God, what a batch of nuts. Let's discuss tomorrow the big lie of 2024, so far anyway, and that it's the Springfield, Ohio nonsense, that 20,000 migrants were dropped all simultaneously on Springfield, Ohio. No, they were recruited over time by employers who were looking to fill jobs that locals either couldn't fill, wouldn't fill, or there weren't enough locals to fill. And yes, it was all done legally, temporary protective status, and they're given social security numbers and work permits and blah, 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 blah. All done legally, all done for the economy. It's about the economy after all, right? Anyway, so the other big lie in Springfield, Ohio, and John Oliver, Last Week Tonight, if you don't get that show on HBO Max, it should be on YouTube at some point in time later today or tomorrow, but I'm going to give you a lot of audio from that because they did a fantastic job with that. One of the lies being, the spread of tuberculosis and HIV and all. Just J.D. Vance just lie after lie after lie after lie on a town in the state that he represents that used to be a swing state. Maybe it will be again here in Ohio. I've got to think that Governor Mike DeWine, Republican of Ohio, can't be happy with the sultry image that the senator from his state has given his state. And there's got to be some other Republicans who are thinking the same thing. And maybe that makes Ohio swing state again. I don't know. It'd be interesting, wouldn't it? More lies, of course, were that the ramp up in crime. That's actually not true. But Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have been talking about ratcheting up of crime since Trump left office anyway. And the data is the data. In fact, new data today, as a matter of fact.
We're also following breaking news this morning. Just moments ago, the FBI released a new report showing the national crime rate decreased in 2023.
Well.
NBC's Ken Delanian is with us this morning. Ken, good morning. Break down what this report says.
Good morning, Jose. This report is entitled Crime in the Nation. It's the FBI's best estimate of what happened last year in terms of crime, and it shows a significant decrease. Violent crime decreased an estimated 3% last year, according to the FBI. Murder and manslaughter came down an estimated 11.6%. That's the biggest drop in the last 20 years. Aggravated assault down 2.8%. And here's what's also important to know about this, Jose, because there's been a lot of criticism of FBI crime data. This data covered 94% of the U.S. population. And while it's true that not all crimes are reported, all murders are counted. And what this shows big picture, because this is the second year in a row that the FBI has documented the decline in violent crime, it shows that after a big spike during the pandemic, violent crime is back down to around 2019 levels, which was historic lows, really, when you compare it to the 1990s.
All right, so you got to point that out. And also, by the way, for those who want to, the bureaus don't report. Guess what? Not all agencies report every year, even in the Trump presidency. That was the case. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Podcast available wherever you podcast. See you tomorrow.